Okay, thank you, everybody. I know that it's the end of the day and everyone is probably very tired, so I appreciate your attention ahead of time. We're going to try and make this pretty interactive so that way it's both more interesting for you all and for our panelists and everyone's a little bit more awake. So I want to start by just going down the line, and I'd appreciate if you all could each introduce yourselves and just give like a 2-minute overview of what you do. You know, with an eye on the clock, that 2 minutes would be great. So Matt, do you want to start with you?
With a focus on the panel.
Yes, and with a focus on the idea of advocating for policy that works for you. So how do you do that in your community?
Okay, so Matthew Rantanen, I'm a director of technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, and 17 years of doing this, somewhere around 4 or 5 years in, we started becoming very knowledgeable in this arena. So ended up starting a lot of advocacy work and outreach and stuff, and trying to make sure that the technology opportunities were available for tribal communities. And in that process, ended up serving 2 terms on the Native Nations Broadband Task Force at the Federal Communications Commission, where we worked directly with the bureaus and the chairman's office and the commissioners to develop rulemakings and craft rulemakings before they hit paper, before they actually became a rulemaking, so you'd have to affect them after the fact. We were actually working on the process, working with the bureaus to be able to understand what the rulemaking should look like as it was put on paper. I feel that Native Nations Communications Task Force is not going to be given the same opportunity moving forward. So I hope I'm wrong in the current administration. I advise the California Broadband Council that delivers information to the governor of California. We work on policy work there. I'm wearing my National Congress of American Indians logo vest today, and I sit and co-chair the Tech and Telecom Subcommittee for their policy making and their resolution making for tech and telecom based on tribal issues, and we bring a lot of those issues to the Hill and submit those as comments on open commenting periods at several of the agencies in the United States, and among many other things. But policy becomes a very sharp focus when you're doing work on the ground and you realize the shortcomings of the lawmaking that's been laid down before you and the situation that the tribes are in. There are some adjustments that need to be made. Tribes need to be included in the language. They need to be, I babysit meetings to make sure that they're not excluded, whether that be accidental or on purpose. So thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm still Denise Williams. I'm still from Cowichan Tribes. I'm still the CEO of the First Nations Technology Council, as far as I know. The Technology Council has a mandate from First Nations to ensure all of our peoples have equal, affordable, sustainable access to digital and connected technologies, to ensure we have the skills to benefit from those technologies, that we are looking at integrated information management systems built and run by our people, and that we have access to technical services as well. So a big part of the work that we do is skills development work. We're just about to launch a program called Foundations in Innovation and Technology that ladders into another program called Futures in Innovation and Technology. This is the curriculum I spoke about earlier that is built by Indigenous people. It's for our people. It's meant to ensure that when we look at British Columbia and the economic growth trajectories of the province and where tech and innovation jobs are going to be, we overlay that with our nations and where our people are, and we ensure that we are ready to be competitive in those sectors and growing our own local digital economies as well. Another piece of work that we do that's complementary to that is the development of our own Indigenous labor market strategy. So understanding what the talent of our people is in British Columbia and how that feeds in to the supply and demand conversation in British Columbia around talent. Common in BC to hear that we have a lack of talent. We don't have a lack of talent, we have a lack of investment in our talent. And so our role is to ensure that we are talking about the sheer numbers of Indigenous people that could be coming into that sector and what it means to have strong local digital economy, and how we might together ensure that connectivity, access to this kind of infrastructure and to these kinds of global markets benefits all of us and doesn't further exacerbate the socioeconomic divide that currently exists. You've already heard from me a bit today, and I think it's really important to note, and I was listening to the conversation earlier around speaking on behalf of. And I just wanted to say that, especially in British Columbia, nobody speaks on behalf of First Nations people, and there is no way that even as the CEO of First Nations Technology Council that I speak on behalf of any of the 203 nations in the province. I've asked my sister, Linnea, at the end there, who's from British Columbia. Our peoples have lived side by side on our territories for tens of thousands of years. I don't speak on behalf of her or her family or what her opportunities are. I've asked her to come be on this panel as well. And I just think it's important for us to raise that one of the challenges is when in Canada we're asked to organize and put forward a voice and put forward a position in a certain timeline, in a certain framework. That's not the way that we operate. That's not our governance model. We have our own way of speaking with each other and making decisions. And so I just wanted to raise that that puts us in a very difficult position because no one speaks on behalf of any nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to everyone. My name is Brian Beaton, and the hat I'm wearing in this particular panel is as a member of the executive of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. And what we've been doing is working with Denise, with the BC groups in a number of different capacities. We work with Ken, with the broadband out of Manitoba, the Broadband Communications Network. We work with Sally on the James Bay coast. We work with Penny Carpenter in Northern Ontario. And we work with institutions like Rob's and Gordon's at the University of Alberta. I'm presently at the University of New Brunswick. And in terms of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, the work that we've been doing is presenting submissions to ICID, to CRTC about spectrum. So like in terms of what people heard earlier, there is what people hear and what people read and what people see. Maybe, I guess we're talking with the wrong people or something like that, but we try the best we can to get the message to the people we work with, and that's one of the reasons we're here. I'm really thankful that the gentleman from ICID is here too, and being able to put out those kinds of comments, and the people from the legislative review panel is represented as well, so that those kinds of that kind of information is being able to be shared. We try our best as volunteers to as a volunteer group, but it's a historical group as well that has been working together for many years now, that has given us the opportunity to present information and present positions from as directed, as guided by all the members, all the member organizations in a supportive way. And like we talked about allies and we talked about policy. So there's lots of opportunities to work in a collaborative way and share information. And we try to do that through our web presence at First Mile, where there's that community focus that Herman so eloquently spoke about earlier. And I feel very humble to be in this position right now, to be speaking about this, and I thank everyone for this opportunity.
Thank you. So as the mayor for a capital city and on different levels of of organizations, what I have found particularly useful is try to understand the issues well. There's lots of opportunity to influence policy, primarily if you do a lot of research, network, connect with people, and analyze existing policies, not just to point out the problem with a policy where it can be deficient, but ideally what politicians like to hear, and including senior bureaucrats, is how a policy should be. You illustrate that often with another region or where a policy has worked, and because ultimately what most governments want to be able to do, especially in an election year, so that's a massive opportunity here in Canada federally, is to have wins. You know, good policies frame programs. Also, you want to sort of say, you know, this criteria, if it, you know, was adjusted, would it make it be way more accessible, that the funding would actually make the results that ultimately most politicians want, is wins. You know, we want to be successful. The other thing maybe that I would suggest is trying to educate all the natural allies that you have, you know, whether it's your municipal politicians, you're not, you know, don't focus just on one person in a position of power. Educate them in a language that they can understand and relate. Tell them, as someone said earlier, the data is important, but the stories is what they'll remember. And just almost have a game plan where you're coming at it at all angles, and ultimately, if you've prepared really succinct, clear messages that those politicians or those decision makers end up all being on the same page, you can make the change that you need. Thank you.
I'm tired. So I'm gonna try and keep it to a less is more talk. I work for the Internet Society. I'm their Senior Director of Communications. So I'm sitting over there in the land of AV Club. And one of the things that I do and probably shaped my entire career around is trying to give a platform to individuals to have a voice, because I'm a big believer in the power of the individual and your own power to affect change. So my career, I was a radio reporter for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I made documentary films for TV Ontario and some other pieces. Everything from that to booking punk rock bands to, you know, working in communications. It's all about giving a platform, and that's how I've viewed myself. And the power of public opinion and public pressure can be a really big thing in terms of affecting policy change. And I firmly believe in that. And with that, I'd rather hear your stories and your questions. So, and I can definitely tell you how I've shaped campaigns and worked on campaigns if you're interested. But I kind of say over to you.
Hi, everyone. I kind of met you all earlier, and my name is Linnea Dick, and I'm the Social Media and Outreach Coordinator, which means I get to foster relationships with communities, but I also get to make memes and post them on Facebook, and that's a part of my job. And I would just like to thank Denise for giving me a seat at this table, because she was going to share her microphone, and for everyone else for making the space more inclusive, and that inclusivity is sometimes just as important as the decision making, and so I really appreciate that from all of you. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest challenges with our organization is that Indigenous youth are often not given a voice at all when it comes to mental health initiatives. And of course, this spans across everything. So we're definitely not having a voice in the change of these policies when it comes to telecommunication. And And the way that we know this is because we talk to each other, and we've actually discussed this very fact at the Hope Forum that We Matter hosted in collaboration with Facebook in January. And this partnership was really valuable and enabled us to have the first ever national gathering of Indigenous youth on mental health issues. And it was different not only in that way, that it was the first of its kind, but we also hosted a roundtable lecture where people like Honorary Jane Philpott and Perry Bellegarde of the AFN attended, but they had to sit and they had to listen to these Indigenous youth voices speak. We were the leaders of that discussion, and that was something that was really fulfilling for a lot of people, and a lot of new ideas came forward. And as my father taught me, who was my biggest mentor, is that it's the youth who are that bridge, that connection between our ancestors, the past, and the ones not yet born, the future. And so we bridge that connection, and so it's even more so important that we have that voice so we can bring things forward that might not be thought of yet. But something that really doesn't work and often happens is that our voices aren't heard. And for me to be so thankful that I have a voice today is a concern. That's a problem. And when we did the roundtable lecture, something that very often happens is that, say, the AFN will be given that responsibility to speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. And this wasn't that kind of event. But yet, Perry Bellegarde came. He got up, he took voice away from the Indigenous youth by talking for 20 minutes, and then he left early. And so these are problems that we're still navigating. We Matter is fortunate to be one of the first organizations of its kind, but that's also one of the biggest challenges. So it's a gift that we get to learn as we go along, but it's also quite difficult at times. And so that's where I stand now on some of these policy changes, is just getting my foot in the door.
I want to start by thanking, can you hear me? Okay. I want to start by thanking you all for being a voice on this panel. I think, you each represent such a unique perspective, and that's, as you've all said, so important for creating policy and for advocating for connectivity and for other issues as well. So I know throughout the last couple of days, we've talked a little bit about what it means to have connectivity, what you can do with it, but there are a lot of barriers to entry that go beyond just getting the technology in a community. There are a lot of barriers at national and federal level, especially when it comes to getting grants or when it comes to the kinds of technology you can deploy. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what advocacy and policy mean for your work, and then how you all have been successful advocates or successful in changing policy in your role, or what you hope to do. What's the goal that you're reaching for? Especially Denise, hearing you talk about, you're not willing to say that you speak on behalf of the communities in your region. So how do you shape policy that you think will benefit them? And then Madeleine, as the mayor of an Indigenous community, how do you see policy shaping the community, and what kinds of voices have influenced your decisions? And then Lia, from a campaign perspective, what does policy mean when you're trying to create a platform for advocacy? But I would love to hear all of your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Hello, hello. Here we go. That's a great question. I'm pretty obsessed with thinking about and wondering if we're asking the right questions. So anytime I'm sort of asked to engage in, whether it's federally, provincially, municipally, with industry, and we're asked, to engage or to participate in discussion around policy reform, around anything like that, I have to just take a beat to think about if the question is right, if the approach is right, what's the methodology, who's it for, what are the outputs going to be, and then what's our chance for iteration? I mean, if you think about any kind of innovation technology, it's a really horrible idea to do all the thinking up front, put a bunch of money in, and then have something at the end that we can't change. So I really think it's important to question the questions and to question the process. And for me, I think my role and then the role of the Technology Council is certainly not to speak on behalf of anyone. And as the president of the Native Youth Association, the same thinking applies. I only see my role as one that makes space. So our role literally is to make space so that we can ask the right questions, have the space to think and to coalesce around how we want to see the future designed and what that means for us and for our people. And that takes time. It takes time. You have to be intentional about it. And we really have to, I think, ensure that the right voices are heard and that there is a diversity of thought, because that's truly what innovation is. Innovation is predicated on a diversity of thought. And so we've got to make sure that our processes allow for that. So the policies that we're asked to comment on, for example, are sometimes around funding and grants and how can we apply for money that can come in and to support our communities. And that's what I mean. Is that the right question? I'm not sure. I think that we're dealing with a really complex, multi-layered, multi-dimensional challenge. And so if we think about how do we build a program that has some allocated dollars and will get everyone to compete for it, I think the end result is we get really incremental, if any, change. Because the problem is too big, it's too complex, it's too dynamic. And so our approach to solving that is incorrect. And I think it's been tried for decades and decades. And I'm reminded by our elders and people that came before me. I mean, I don't want to repeat that. I feel like I'm in a relay race, and that my little part of it, is really to look at the work that's done before us and think about the future generations. And I don't know that programs and reporting and data collection for someone else's government is a really good idea. So I just think we need a lot of space to think about that, because I certainly don't have the answer. So I think it's all about just creating space so we can think about it.
I'll go. I just wanted to sort of address the, it's so big, and, how can you possibly affect change when it just seems monumental? And I totally get that feeling. I think we all do in this room. And I think one of the biggest challenges when you're campaigning or when you're advocating for change is your own self-doubt about what you can do. And part of the way that I try to think about things when I'm going into a campaign, so I was also at World Wildlife for a number of years during the climate campaign. And that just seems like crazy. How are you going to solve climate change? Like, how? Has anybody done it? And it's really breaking down, the change. It's one, identifying the change you want to see on a big level. So you have this vision of save the environment or, solve climate change. But then you really have to be so minutiae in terms of breaking it down into like the step by step of what you're going to see and, what you can see this year, this month, exactly what you want to see. So I worked on the climate campaign, I think it was 2011, the COP15 climate conference in Denmark. I just remember being locked in a room for 2 months in Copenhagen, pushing for a very specific text to go into the treaty declaration. And we knew exactly what it said, we knew exactly what we wanted it to say, and then we were very clear, and that was our goal. So I think that helps in terms of, when you're feeling completely overwhelmed, just to break it down. I think and it can take a long time. I think the Freedom to Marry campaign in the United States took 50 years, for example, and sometimes it takes that long. And you'd have to have that gumption to keep going, but keep going step by step by step by step and being very clear about what you want, who's going to give it to you, and then who they listen to. So I think that's sort of this, if you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're advocating for policy change, because it can be very overwhelming because these are huge things, you just have to have patience and also focus and a really good step-by-step plan.
Maybe what I'll just also add is what I've benefited from is also looking what's happening elsewhere, not just in southern Canada as a person who lives in northern Canada, but also what's happening in the other Arctic regions. So being able to say, I remember being in a telecommunications summit in my own community approximately 7 years ago and pushing for fiber optic, and I literally had politicians at the territorial and even my senator sort of say, fiber optic, that's pie in the sky technology. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's been around for decades. So the other sort of thing that works, and it's that sort of, you have to balance it and you have to be very careful, is political embarrassment is actually a strategy. Politicians and governments don't like to be embarrassed, and they don't like to be embarrassed nationally, and they don't like to be embarrassed internationally. So, when you have platforms, I've been, in Reykjavik last year and explaining how we managed to get money for our dump, and now I'm pushing money for, a fiber optic network, but having politicians actually land on the ground and then finding out that, the telecommunications suck. It's the first thing that most people realize when they get off the plane. And that's the first thing that the politicians say when they get back, back in Ottawa off the plane is, oh my God, you should see how bad, the internet is. And so that actually works to your advantage. And as I said, giving them the opportunity to get out of that embarrassing situation is equally important.
Thank you, appreciate that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit more about the Hope Forum. So when we did the Hope Forum, we had that understanding that youth don't have these opportunities to talk about their needs. And so we created an opportunity for youth to create some calls to action. And we created this document into a PDF, and some of the calls to action on there were social media and internet based, but a lot of them were direct in the community initiatives, because those are what not only Indigenous youth, but Indigenous people respond to the most. And when we sent them out, we didn't really receive that much feedback, but one of our advocates is Cindy Blackstock, who is so amazing. And something that's really great about her is she doesn't try to be a savior. She really works hand in hand with the people that she works with. And that's something that's constantly missing from policy making. There is no hand-in-hand relationship. It's always, tell me what you want, give me the paper and I'll look over it. And that doesn't work no matter what kind of policies you're trying to create. And, but definitely she is a hero, even though she doesn't try to be. And she's someone that I really admire. And she recently won an award, and she got to donate the grant money to any organization, and she donated $50,000 to We Matter so that we could start an on-the-ground Ontario support network. And that's what allyship looks like. That's what cultivating a relationship between two people or two entities looks like. And I don't know how many of you feel that your politicians actually know you. Has anyone ever met a politician and felt like this person is going to be my friend and they're going to care about my needs and actually carry these needs forward? And I guarantee that there's none of you in this room who felt that way. And so that's definitely something that's hugely missing. And we see it now too with Justin Trudeau and his, he will show up at meetings and the chiefs will all meet, and that's a part of our traditions, and he'll say, I'm running out of time, you all have 5 minutes to speak. And that, again, is not a way that a relationship works. There's communication between two people, there's understanding between two people, and there's respect between the two people. And that's what we haven't seen at all in terms of Indigenous communities from our policymakers.
And that actually leads really well to my next question. I'd love to hear how partnerships impact each of your work. And so Matt and Brian, you both have extensive experience with partnerships and impacting change. And then Linnea, I'd love to hear more about what you think a good youth partnership looks like. If it doesn't exist now, how do we create that?
So I just want to touch on a few things. There's there's some education in things that are happening in the United States with the tribes. Most of the tribes that I work with on a regular basis, the 19 tribes that I work for, have a youth council, and their youth council mirrors their adult council that's running the government of their tribe. So they're very much involved learning the process of government and how to manage their tribe and how to work with their tribe and then move into those roles as they get elected. Some of the youth have been able to unseat the incumbent that's in the position because they have enough knowledge after being on the youth council to be able to manage that seat. And it's been very effective use of the community resource, the youth, the future. The National Congress of American Indians has a complete youth delegation that is that essentially mirrors the organizing body, and it is a pathway for youth to understand how resolutions and development in policymaking happens and how to work with the Hill. They work with the adults, and they go to the congressman and the senator's office, and they go to Capitol Hill, and they work with the White House hand in hand and side by side with the adults, so they get a good training path for that. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities in the tribes and the organizations I work with the youth. There are pathways. There's a lot of training, obviously, that has to happen to how do you navigate a federal government? How do you get in the door? How do you get in a meeting? How do you do all those things? And having the youth shadow adults and then be a part of that process and then take over that process is really brilliant. I actually do speak on behalf of tribes. I've been asked and placed in a position at the National Congress of American Indians, vetted by 360 different tribes, to speak on tech and telecom policy on their behalf, to advocate on Capitol Hill and the federal government in the United States, to work on resolutions and development and develop policy to actually affect change for the tribes as a whole. Yes, there are individual issues that each tribe has, and as much as we possibly can, we try to communicate those issues. But in general, we have the same problem, right? And there are overarching rules that we can defeat that affect every single one of us, that make each of those individual problems easier to conquer on the ground. So without advocates that speak on behalf of you at the federal level and babysit some of the stuff that's happening unbeknownst to you, because it's not very well advertised to each individual member of each individual tribe, we would be missing out on a lot of process that happens. So having people in place with a trust relationship that you've vetted and you trust to be in that place is really key in the government process, at least in the United States. Because if there weren't people like myself, Danae, who isn't here at the moment, and Valerie Fast Horse, I'm sure James is going to be stepping into this role at some point. There's a bunch of us that do this on behalf of multiple governments. If we weren't doing that, those crafty politicians would be sliding stuff through all day long and twice on Sunday, and we'd never catch it. So I think it's a good thing that we have a handful of people out there speaking on certain issues and supporting tribes on certain issues. But it's a different relationship. I've been doing it for 17 years, and I've been doing that policy piece for the last 6 or 7 years with that group. And it was a hard-earned trust relationship, but it is definitely a relationship and a partnership with many, many people and many, many governments to make that work. Thanks.
If it's okay, I'd like Denise to respond about the partnership more than be as a partner. and the work that's going on as in that role.
The question is about partnerships, the role that they play and why they're important.
Yeah, especially for policymaking, for advocating for policy.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the reasons we're here and we're really benefiting as the First Nations Technology Council and First Mile Connectivity Consortium is because as we're thinking about which, policies, recommendations, even to put forward in the session that we had this afternoon, we understand that we have to be working hand in hand with each other to strengthen our position because we are different from our neighbors to the south, and that's interesting to hear. I mean, it's a point well taken, and I think that we are different. We do have different partnership models and different ways of working with each other. So I would just say that the types of partnerships that we are trying to create are really, they're values based. We're very careful about who we partner with, who we align with, and a lot of that reason is because we don't have a lot of time. I mean, I feel a general, very intense sense of impatience about a lot of these things because I'm terrified about what might happen to our current generation of youth and future generations of youth if we don't create policy and push for change quickly enough. And so we recognize that there are really key partnerships that can help us to transcend some of these challenges and to push harder and in a more informed way and in a stronger, more unified way. And so the lifting up of our people and our vision, it can't be done alone. And so the partnership that we have with the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, it precedes me. I think it had been going on from the 1990s, and a lot of what I learned about a lot of the submissions that went forward from that group to Infrastructure Canada, I said, you've heard a lot from the First Mile Connectivity Consortium over the decades on this kind of work, and that's how I learned, where British Columbia and where our people are situated within that, and bringing in industry and leaders in the tech space, that helps us understand what's possible and what we should be rounding out some of our suggestions and recommendations to look like. So I would just say, of course it's critical, but we've got to make sure that our partnerships, the people that we align with, that we don't have to educate those partners. We've got to make sure that we understand a common vision together and that we're able to get on the road and start working really quickly, because I do have a sense that we don't have a lot of time to get it right.
I'm talking a lot for someone who said they weren't going to talk much. But I just think on the notion of partnerships, again, you have to be really strategic in who you choose to partner with. And to do that, you have to know what is the change you want to see. What is the change you want to see? Who is it going to give it to you? There is always a person or people who has that button to yes. And then who do they listen to? Because it really comes down to that. You can advocate and talk as much as you want and speak as loudly as you can about the change you want to see, but if that particular decision maker does not listen to you or is not influenced by you, you'll only go so far. So really, a really great campaigner that I know, and it probably sounds dramatic, but I think he's true. He was telling me once, you have to know who is going to give you what you want so well, you know what they eat for breakfast. You have to know everything about them. And then who do they listen to? There was one time we were advocating for legislation change on sustainable fisheries policy in the United Kingdom. And WWF has world-class conservationists, that are basically, small C celebrities in their own right and in their own field. Nothing was happening. And then we got Jamie Oliver to stand up and do it. No problem, passed. So because the public was basically listening to celebrity chefs. So you have to know that if you're going to partner with someone, be very strategic about who you choose.
Thank you. And so I've been given the 3-minute warning.
Yeah,
okay.
I just have something to add. Something that really helped me learn as an individual was that I had such an amazing father who was a mentor, he was a community leader, and he was my best friend. And he was someone that everyone trusted and everyone went to for advice because he was so generous and so caring. And I was really fortunate to grow up with that because not everyone does. And so my dad, being who he was, really paved a road for me to have the opportunities to walk forward and carry my truth forward, have a voice, and not be afraid, because I always had those good teachings to refer back to. But when my dad passed away just over a year ago, I was really lost. And I felt like I no longer had a road. So when you talk about the training and the knowing the right person and the skill building, all of that's really important. And I totally agree, but also the understanding that we want to give the strength to the people so that eventually they'll be able to carry on themselves. Because today where I'm sitting, I have the teachings of my ancestors and my dad, but I am sitting here as myself. And that's what we need in policy change and in any kind of change that we're going for.
Thank you all so much. I don't know that we have time for questions right now, so I would encourage you all to come talk to the panelists after this over dinner or later tonight to ask them any questions. So we can say thank you, and then I will lead us into our last 10-minute exercise of the day. So thank you all so much.